apologize for not doing this sooner, but I was terribly under the weather, not that you lot care. This is, of course, the Fantastic Four review. I know it's already been a week, I think longer that it's been out, but I still thought that I had to add to the chorus. I had to share my views on this film. Marvel has been this love, hate affair that we, as fans, have now come to begrudgingly, I think, accept. I think that we've now come to this acceptance, because at first it was denial, but we've now come to this acceptance that we're not going to be having the same kind of movies that we had during Marvel's phases 2, 3, 2 and 3, not 4, definitely not 4, but phases 2 and 3. And that sort of the heyday, that golden era, that period where Marvel was delivering one banger after another, I think those days are gone. And it is sad to see, perhaps not a demise, because again, they've still got a lot of IP out there to develop. And, you know, when you've been making the kind of money that Marvel's been making, Marvel Disney, you certainly don't want to sort of throw in the towel just yet. But I think it's safe to say that we, as fans, can perhaps no longer look to Marvel and its stable of characters to deliver those superhero thrills, highs that we got from movies ranging from Captain America Winter Soldier, Civil War, Endgame, Avengers, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, so on, and, you know, all of these. It's sad. It's sad to accept this. And if by what I'm saying is any indication, then yes, Fantastic Four, unfortunately, isn't that sort of whiz-bang movie that they were hoping it to be, to somehow or the other reclaim that crown, the throne of sort of like, you know, preeminent superhero franchise. Unfortunately, that's not what Fantastic Four is. And again, I would say it's a shame. For those of you like myself who grew up reading the comics and of course read Fantastic Four, you know that the Fantastic Four, on paper, literally, has what it takes to be a franchise that is as good as any other, as good as the X-Men, as good as the Avengers. From how it was originally conceived with Lee and Kirby, and the sort of retro sci-fi, which we've now look back. I mean, sort of if you ever on Cartoon Network were able to catch, you know, that 60s cartoon of the Fantastic Four, there was just something about that, particularly in which, you know, if you remember how they used to run, that shuffle type run thing. But then just also, I mean, sort of that element of adventure, number one. Then, of course, the family and their superpowers. The science fiction element, that very retro science fiction element. You know, that sort of whole being in the 1920s and conceiving of, you know, the next 50 years of having ray guns and flying cars, teleportation devices, and even the aesthetic, that entire look that 60s, you know, derived. You know that it definitely had the goods, and that if a good film was delivered, if we got a Fantastic Four movie worthy of you know, its source, then, you know, you'd have a winner. Unfortunately, previous attempts to do so, to bring the Fantastic Four to the screen, failed, even though one of them got a sequel. But I was going through on Facebook, this popped up. There were publicity stills from the first iteration of Fantastic Four 2005. Jessica Alba, Chris Evans, Michael Chiklis, and I know I'm going to spoil his name, Ian Grufford, if that's how you pronounce it. Ian Grufford, I don't know. and just that entire look, that was something that brought back a lot of memories. But it also brought back the memory of the failure of early Marvel, when sort of Marvel and Sony were putting out films, Marvel, Sony, and even Fox. And under the aegis of Avi Arad, that entire era of Marvel, I don't think produced anything worthwhile except for, I think, Blade. But let's be honest, I mean, even though it is a superhero movie, it is essentially a vampire film. And Blades 1, 2, Let Us Never Speak of 3 were really good. To this day, they stand the test of time. But everything from that era, whether it was Ghost Rider or Daredevil, Fantastic Four, they were just like, this face, if this face could be put in words, that's exactly what those films were. Then there was another attempt, this time with Miles Teller, Michael B. Jordan, one of the Mara sisters, was it Kate or Rooney? I don't know which one. And I'm forgetting who played Ben Grimm. It was that British actor, I think. Right. So you had all of these guys. And that other British actor was playing Doctor Doom. Even that was another subpar attempt at trying to bring this family to the comic book to screen. Now, of course, this is a third attempt, and third time's always the charm. But unfortunately, it's not. Marvel has, I'm not saying it had a lot riding on the Fantastic Four to perhaps bring it back into that sort of box office glory that were the days of, sort of phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 5, as it is launched now. Yes, it is phase 5 now. First of all, with Captain America Brave New World, which I reviewed here on The Last Picture Show. Then, of course, Thunderbolts, also reviewed. These were its attempts at a course correction. Because Marvel, with its disastrous phase 4, realized that, sort of that age-old argument of quality versus quantity and all of that. I think it realized very soon, well, I wouldn't even say very soon, I think it took a whole 2 years for them to realize that whatever direction they're taking isn't working for them. And somehow or the other, we need to recalibrate, to readjust, to figure out just what exactly we're doing. Why do people want to watch our movies? And why they're not watching our movies anymore. Because the thing is that the thing with superhero movies, and the thing that what made those other movies so successful, is that it wasn't just fans who were showing up in the cinema to watch these movies. It was non-fans as well. I mean, they could be people who know nothing about, the intricacies of the Avengers or the Infinity Stones or who Thanos is or anything like that. But these are just people in for the ride, and a good ride at that, and that's what those movies delivered. And then after that, when you had, again, potential material, I mean, for example, like the Eternals, to somehow replace the Avengers, but then you deliver such a dud of a movie that it sort of killed everyone's hopes. Then you realize that perhaps these 3 movies that they released now in Phase 5 should have been much, much better. They should have been films that made audiences forget how bad Phase 4 was. But Captain America Brave New World was a very average movie, a film that didn't even deserve to be a movie. It was a story that at best was like a 3-parter, sort of on TV. If you could do Secret Invasion, then why the hell couldn't you do, this Brave New World storyline? Thunderbolts, out of all 3 of these movies, of course I'll be getting to Fantastic Four in a second, but Thunderbolts out of all 3 of these, for me perhaps, is the best. Maybe because it tried to do something different. I don't think that's merit badge enough. That simply because they tried to do something different, that the movie was better. But it was an attempt at sort of like, making perhaps a super movie differently, having a cast of characters that what's it called, audiences are not familiar with, which is why perhaps it didn't do well at the cinema. But as a film and as a superhero film, I would still think that it was much, much better than anything the DCEU put out, even at its best, and there was never any best. Now as to Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four, every single element of the movie is pretty good. Unfortunately, none of those elements actually come together. Why? That is because the linchpin, that is the script, is bad. The film itself suffers from very weak writing, derivative writing from writers who perhaps didn't want to lean into the better elements of the Fantastic Four and instead leaned on stuff that we've already seen before. Yes, we haven't technically seen Galactus as he is in this movie on screen. We had him very briefly in sort of Fantastic Four and was it The Rise of the Silver Surfer or something like that. But the storyline, for want of a better word, is cliche. I don't think that it presents anything new. There is a fundamental lack of set pieces in a movie that has characters with abilities that we haven't seen on screen before. So I think they could have done really well with that. You can't really, crazy with that. And the chief sin of any film, it's boring. There is a point, I would say after the first 45 minutes of the movie, and I'll tell you exactly where. Okay, going back just a very quick second. The movie starts out, thankfully, without having to do the whole origin story thing. I'm glad that they skipped past all of that. They introduce it in sort of newsreel form. Who the Fantastic Four are, how they got their powers, how they've become this particular world, because, and this is a spoiler, this is I think Earth 828, it's not Earth 616, if that's the one that we're in. It's not that, so they've become the saviors of their world, it's chief protectors, and they're celebrities, so it introduces us to that. Until this point, sure, it's kind of gotten me. It's got me that, interested me enough. Then we are introduced to the threat that is posed by Galactus, the Fantastic Four then, and of course I'm giving away spoilers in the storyline. The Fantastic Four then sort of volunteer to go out and meet this new threat, and whatever happens there happens on Galactus's ship, and there's this whole chase scene straight out of Intergalactic. Not Intergalactic, my apologies, Interstellar. Intergalactic, of course, is a Beastie Boys song, and it is at that point, in that particular set piece, which should have been thrilling, that I kind of turned inward and thought to myself, I'm not particularly interested in the storyline anymore. This movie lacks a pulse. There is something about, I would say, that middle section of the movie that completely kills the momentum, that completely disengages myself and you, perhaps, if you felt the same way, as audience members. You look at this movie and you're like, oh man, when is this going to end? And that's really a shame, because the effort, and I tip my hat to the production design department and team, whoever's put this together. They really go to lengths to construct this world. I mean, when I say retro sci-fi, I mean this movie embodies it. I mean, sort of, it's ostensibly set in the 60s in that world. And sort of from the design of the Fantasticar to Herbie, to their uniforms, to Excelsior, their spaceship, even New York as it is, everything is just perfect. It just looks so good. I mean, it's almost like, Pixar levels of attention and detail to this world building, and that's really good. The casting, I'm okay with, except for, of course, Pedro Pascal, because, pardon my French, that motherfucker's like in everything. I was reading the other day, I think this was on, I don't know, Instagram or something like that, where this man has been in like 12 movies in the past like 2 years, if that stat is correct. But yeah, man, I was kind of hoping that, if you remember from Doctor Strange and Madness of the Multiverse, or whatever it was called, Multiverse of Madness, we had John Krasinski introduced, him as Mr. Fantastic, that world's Mr. Fantastic. I actually liked that casting. I thought that was pretty solid. And then to have potentially Emily Blunt, his wife, to play Sue, that would have been pretty good. I would have been interested to see that, but that didn't happen. We got instead Pedro Pascal. Vanessa Kirby, I was going to say very easy on the eyes, but before I even say that, a very good actress, and of course very easy on the eyes, and she's good as Sue Storm. Joseph Quinn as, he's I think a bit of a weak link here, because I don't know, I just don't get this sense of Johnny Storm from him. He's kind of muted, which I don't know why. I mean, maybe that's just how he was written. I didn't get a good sense of that guy. Elon Boss, if that's his name, the bear actor who plays Ben Grimm, he's soulful, he's got it. He really, I think he does a good job as a thing. The only issue I have is that I remember even from the comic, from the 60s show, from the other cartoon, and then sort of, Chickless as the thing. I mean, that gravelly voice is missing. So to hear Elon's sort of soulful voice coming out from the Thing's brutish stone visage is a little off for me. But he grows a beard later on, and I think that's really good. He looked pretty good in a beard. Never going to fault that one. So no problem with the casting. Of course, they gender swapped. They didn't technically gender swap Silver Surfer, because in this it's not Norin Rad, it's Shala Bal, Norin Rad's wife, I think. But changing it from Norin Rad to Shala Bal doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't really add anything to the movie. It doesn't even add anything to the character of Silver Surfer. So I think that, it made zero difference. So, I mean, if there are sort of men out there who are up in arms about this particular change, I don't think it's that big a deal, because the character sucks either way. I mean, if this even were Norin Rad, I think they would have written him the same, and it wouldn't really have worked, because the character is unfortunately a cliche. Sort of, I think it's much better presented maybe in the earlier Fantastic Four, The Rise of the Silver Surfer one. Here, it was kind of like, almost by the numbers. You expected, you could tell from a mile away what was going to happen. Cinematography is actually pretty good. There's some beautiful shots in this movie, like that interstellar chase scene that I was talking about. The music is pretty much straight out from Hans Zimmer's playbook. But, the shots are pretty decent there. There's this beautiful scene of the Silver Surfer where she's up in the sky and there's the moon, sort of like she's almost haloed by it. So very nice, really, really good shots there. Unfortunately, it's the script that just doesn't do this movie justice or even service for the franchise that it has, the IP that it has, the characters. Literally, I mean, sort of like in that middle chunk where you've got about 30 to 50 minutes of just like, nothing going on. You're like, where the hell is the action? Where is like, when can I see like, I don't know, Reed stretch out or something like that, or sort of like, extend his brain or something else, as people often make that joke. You don't even get to see them put their powers on display. Like, it only happens towards the end. And even that is like for barely like, I would say, 10, 15 minutes? And even that, I would say, isn't enough. I mean, in a movie like this, let us be clear. This is a superhero movie. Why do we not have more set pieces? Why do we not have these guys, I don't know, beating down on some robots or something like that? Or rescuing like civilians in the middle? Because, in often when you have these superhero team movies, whether it's JLA, Avengers, or anything like that. You never see, unlike in the comics or even in the cartoons, in the animated series, you never see them doing rescue things like the way Superman does. Or like, for example, in the Justice League, in the animated series, like how, besides being, people who can kick ass, they're also people who can rescue, from natural disasters and stuff like that. I would have loved to see something like that. You don't get to see any of that. I think the only sort of moment for the latter half of this movie where I actually sat up in my seat was when they have Harvey Moleman, played by that wonderful actor, something Hauser, I'm forgetting his name, where he's in it for literally, I think, like 2 minutes. But I mean, he's a scene stealer in that. And I was like, wait, couldn't they have introduced him earlier on? At least I wouldn't have been this bored. That is the movie. I mean, sort of even this final thing where they cook up. Okay, so in this case, Galactus, this cosmic force who devours planets to, satiate his hunger. In this case, he learns that, the Reed and Sue are pregnant, and Franklin, a cosmic being in himself, he is perhaps his ticket out of this hell, this sort of Promethean sort of thing that he's been cursed to. And he throws a bargain where, like, you give me Franklin and I will, spare your planets. These guys cook up a scheme that, hey, let's transport the world or something, like transport the Earth to another dimension or something like that. And, to hell with Galactus. Okay, fine. They kind of changed that from, the original. It's okay. But I mean, the entire last, sort of the entire thing where he descends upon New York and Godzilla stomps on a couple of buildings and stuff, and these guys have to get him to that sort of transporter pad. All of that stuff is just sort of the weakest possible form of seeing the Fantastic Four in action. Could we not have seen something else? I mean, I would have loved to see the way Reed, the way Mr. Fantastic uses his powers, or Sue. All Sue does is just stand there and pushes really hard, and Johnny the Human Torch throws a couple of flames at thing, and the thing bulldozes his way into a building, and that's it. It's just barely there. I would have wanted to see more action from this movie, which is where I feel that this movie is this kind of dud. And that comes from the script. So, all in all, if this was their best shot at the Fantastic Four, then unfortunately, I think that sort of 3 strikes and you're out. It didn't do it for me. One more thing, and here's one more spoiler coming your way. There is, of course, an end credit scene, and the end credit scene is a very brief introduction, almost a glimpse at Doctor Doom. It does not it does not tie into the Thunderbolts end credit scene where we saw the Excelsior, their ship, sort of enter Earth 616. I don't know when they're going to do that. Of course, the next movie is Avengers Doomsday. What do we say about that?